Map Book Club, where ordinary parents encourage one another to develop an extraordinary appreciation of math. We love what we know and struggle over the unfamiliar. Through weekly conversation and exploration among friends, we can begin to enjoy ideas that seem difficult. Join our book club as we discover how math helps us to know God and to make Him known.
Welcome to the Math Map Book Club, where Christy Gilpin and I discuss each week the Math Map curriculum for families enrolled in Classical Conversations communities. Today is Wednesday, August 13th, 2025, and I'm really happy to see everybody as we continue to launch to our new academic year. So Kirsty, take it away.
Excuse me, let me share my screen. And welcome everybody. We are looking at lesson 3 comparison this week. And just a reminder that what we are doing is we are using the Math Map at Home outline that is in the Foundations Guide to work through the lessons each week, looking at integers, fractions, and monomials as representative lessons for those that you might be using at home. And on week 1, we said it was like drinking from the fire hydrant because we tried to give you all of the things that you could do every week. And this week we're trying to give you sort of one piece, one or two different pieces that you might want to try and incorporate into your particular homeschool. I had the blessing of being able to speak to some parents in Boone, North Carolina, and West Palm Beach, Florida. So I just want to give a shout out to them for their hospitality. And I thought it was just a really great reminder after talking to them about the vast variety of families that we have that are using the Math Map. And there are so many ways to make this work in your homeschool. And so as you're watching and joining with us, ask questions, participate, share your ideas. Don't think that we are telling you what you need to do. As Lee has so often said, you are the one that needs to use the book. Don't let the book use you. And that includes the Math Map, that we really want you to feel equipped to tailor and to use the materials in the way that is going to best meet the needs of your particular homeschool. So these are all ideas. These are not necessarily best practices. You're going to need to determine what's best for your family. So every day we're going to start our day by talking about the flashcards. And so I've grayed out some of the things that we've talked about in the past. And so as we add things, those will sort of gradually fall off. But just to remind us all, some of the things that we've talked about, we're simply reading the flashcards together, celebrating flashcards that have been mastered. Don't always put them aside, but keep them in your rotation so students can be encouraged. Mixing up decks, letting students choose cards that would review that lesson. And an idea for this week for flashcards is to attach your flashcards to your daily activities. So maybe as part of setting the table, your students flip a flashcard and set a place, flip a flashcard and set a place. And so you could do that, right? Before, whoever gets choose the flashcards, whoever gets them fastest gets to pick their seat in the car first. So there's a lot of different ways that we can just bring those flashcards along with us and attach them to those daily activities. You could even time how long it takes to do flashcards and say, okay, well, you've got to look at these flashcards while you're brushing your teeth. Brushing your teeth is supposed to be 60 seconds. So you should be able to do 6 flashcards. So there's a lot of different things that you could do, but that's a way to, if you have students, especially who maybe get anxious, if they think they've got to just go fast through the flashcards, that's a way that you could break up those flashcards throughout the day and throughout the week and just make that a continual way of reviewing. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share about flashcards this week? Something that's maybe worked in your home? All right.
Competition with siblings, if you have siblings. That motivates sometimes.
I remember a homeschool speaker once years ago when I was first new to homeschooling in Florida. And he basically said, God did not design our families to be a Norman Rockwell painting, but he designed them to be iron that sharpens iron. And so that sibling rivalry that sometimes can get on our nerves can certainly be harnessed for good. It's a great idea.
So one of the things we used to do was throw the flashcards on the ground and like be in a circle and run around it and take turns, just so there was movement going on too while we did the cards.
All right. So on continuing on our day, our frame, our piece of the curriculum that's not a lesson page that we're going to look at on our first day together is our covers. And we've been talking about the different skills that we can use to converse about the covers. We continue to emphasize that classical conversations is really not about the content, although the content is good and the content is worthwhile, but it is about teaching our children to learn and teaching them the skills of learning. So we've talked about using our core habits, our common topics of invention, and then our canons of rhetoric. I thought was kind of fun because a lot of times it's hard to sort of think about how would you use that to inspire a conversation. So as I thought about Memoria, I thought when you're looking at a piece of art, you can ask your students, what do they remember? What memories are brought to mind? And that may involve the process of naming or attending those skills of Memoria. It may involve using our common topics, because they might say that in this case, liberty looks like the statue of, or justice, excuse me, looks like the Statue of Liberty. That's a comparison, but that's pulling from their Memoria of something else. When we think about invention, a lot of times we're thinking about what are we pulling from our Memoria. Those are the common topics when we're writing, right? We're faced with that blank page and we're using those common topics to help us generate some ideas. When we're looking at this and thinking about our conversation, maybe we could ask our students if we were going to invent something or create something, what would this art inspire you to invent or create? We can always look at the arrangement. How is this art arranged? Does that tell us something about what the artist was trying to say? When we look at especially the words that are on the cover, the reflection and the quotation, are there any elements of style that the author used? Right? How are we impacted by their choice of elocution? And then especially for our older students, if we maybe are doing a little bit of research into these people or into these quotations and reflections, we could ask, how were they delivered? Was this from a speech? Was it from a sermon? Was it a letter? Was it in a book? So asking how it was originally delivered to their audience. And those are all some ways that we could use our canons of rhetoric to generate some conversation about our covers, while still helping our students to practice what do those canons mean, right? What does Memoria mean? Invention, arrangement, elocution, and delivery. What do those canons mean? How do we use them? And how did somebody else use them is a different way of assessing that. Also on day one, we ask you to take a look at the math map itself, remembering that we're encouraging our students to see their progress through the math map so that they can see how all of those ideas go together. This week, it's a great week to talk about the dimensions, because we're going from 0D to 1D. And so helping students to attend to those blue bars on the left-hand side where we are changing our dimensions. What does that mean to change dimension? Right? If this is our first year through, we may not have a lot of answers, but if it's our second or third year in the math map, we may now be able to start talking about what are some differences between 0D and 1D.
Christy, I have a question. So I see it says Foundations at Home assignment guide. Where is that found? I don't have a foundation student right now.
It really is just here.
Okay.
It is only in the booklets, but if you go to the companion and you click on any of those foundations level booklets that have been printed, so any of the digits, integers, or fractions, you can see it in there.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And again, this is what we're suggesting is a flow. You and your family may find a different organization works better for you, but we're trying to give people a general idea of how they could break up their week. And I keep saying that because there's so many varieties, and we really want you to feel encouraged and equipped to pick the one that works best for your family. Any other questions on the math map or what it looks like to go from 0D to 1D? All right. And so then we would round out our day with 4 lesson pages. And as a reminder, maybe I'll make this our thing to talk about next week. You can work either pages 1 through 16, so 1 through 4 on day 1, and so forth, or you could work all the 1 set pages, which is 1, 5, 9, and 13 on day 1, so that you're seeing similar topics. Different students may do better with different arrangements of the lesson pages. For the purpose of the book club, I'm going through pages 1 through 4 on days 1 through 4. But at home, you would be doing 4 lesson pages in one day as your sort of your goal. But again, you may choose to do fewer pages, and those are some strategies that we'll talk about in other weeks. Last week, we talked about scaffolding to support an older student. So perhaps sending your younger students to do their tracing or coloring while you help an older student to work through those initial pages and get started. Alternatively, if you maybe need to scaffold for your younger students first, you could ask your older students to go and read through the lessons independently while you work with your younger students to read sections aloud. Now, of course, we could do that all together, but just trying to give you some ways if you have had your conversation together and your students are ready to break up. If you have a student who's ready to be a little bit more independent, you could ask them to go ahead and read through their lessons and even begin their lessons while you work with those younger students. So especially if you have students who are still developing readers, this would be a great opportunity to read with them, or even if you just read the instructions with them so that they knew what your expectations were for them to do while you worked with your older students. So those are just a couple of strategies, is to start with your older students or to start with your younger students. Anybody have anything they'd like to share as far as what they've done at home when they've got older and younger students and maybe need to give one or the other some independent attention? All right. So as I mentioned last week, every week I want to give you an opportunity if you have math questions. So page 1 of lesson 3, here are our 3 domains that we're looking at. And you can see that the complexity of the pages is growing. So there's more on each page. We're going a little bit deeper each time. The font changes slightly. So we can just look at it quickly. We can see a gradual growing through the domains. Does anybody have any questions about some of the material that may be included here on page 1 of lesson 3? All right. So looking at day 2, where our recommendation is that you would look at the I-squared invention page. remembering that our goal for the invention page is to practice those 5 common topics of invention. I was reminded this week that some of our families that are in foundations maybe are not as familiar with the common topics and the canons of rhetoric as some of our challenge families. I think in general, CC is doing a better job of really pulling those 15 skills together so that all of our families are familiar with them. And so on this page, if you're not yet familiar, that's okay, because this is an opportunity for you to develop your familiarity with those common topics and those canons of rhetoric alongside your student. So that's why each week we want to give you some suggestions, and you can certainly look in the companion for some other suggestions. Last week we talked about definition. This week, let's talk about comparison. So when we look at this page, we could ask a comparison question in a couple of different ways. If we just say what is the same and what is different, that can be a very general question. So if I asked all of you what's the same and what's different on this page, what are some things you might pull out as being the same?
There's lots of different lines in different sections, but the lines don't all look the same.
Good.
That everywhere we have a letter like A or B that seems to be related to a point that's on that line.
What are some things that are different?
Well, on the real number line, there are some digits on there that we're very familiar with. But I love that our irrational numbers were put on there. So we've got phi and pi and Euler's number, all of those. It helps, like I tend to think of pi as this formula thing, but it's really a number, and it's just stuck right there between 3 and 4, closer to 3. It just helps to make that more, that concept more concrete in my brain.
The ends of the different lines are different. Some have points for segments, some have arrows, and then there's the one down at the bottom that even has arrows leading up to a stopping point.
So notice that that's a very general question that allows a student to just play all over that page, finding some things that are different and similar, or different and the same. We could also say, how are these two things similar? How are these two things different? So for example, in this case, we might want to be very specific, and I might say, how is this axis and this axis, right? How are they similar and how are they different? And now there's a little less freedom for our students to choose, and we're giving them some guidance. So for our youngest students, just giving them that full playground of saying, hey, find some things that are the same, find some things that are different, lets them just look at all kinds of different things and maybe make connections that we wouldn't expect. If there's something that we as parents are perhaps trying to help them see, right, we might pick out and say, okay, look at these two axes and tell me what's the same and what's different.
Yeah, I find that's really important for a new student because they don't really quite know what the adult's asking them. And so even starting off with saying, okay, just count how many A's are on this page, or just count how many lines are on this page. And they say, oh, do you want me to count the ticks? Sure, the ticks can count as a line, or no, the ticks aren't lines. You know, whatever you want to say to them in order to help them see the details.
Lee, I like that reminder that if our students are not sure, that we can play the game too, right? We could ask them, choose two things, and I'll tell you what I see is similar and what I see is different. So our students might pick two very strange things to compare, which reminds me of my days as a Challenge A tutor. And I think we started off and it was a table and a pencil that you were supposed to compare. Right. So there's a way that you could model for your student that skill of comparison by letting them choose what they want you to compare. So again, remember that when we're looking at this, we want to look at that title that says invention, and it says invention because what we are playing with, what we are practicing are those 5 common topics of invention.
I think it's an important distinction because what you're just attending to the page, whereas I think many get overwhelmed because they take a look at this page and they think they have to know or do or solve the math on it. But there's no command that tells you to do anything other than attend to the page.
That's a great reminder, Shauna, that we're not teaching this page.
Right.
This page is not here for you to understand and teach to your children. It is just here for you to look at with those common topics of invention in mind.
It reminds me of like when you're giving a child or even an adult learner, they're looking at music for the first time because they're taking piano or violin lessons or something. They have to attend very, very closely. So that's all we're teaching them to do is just look at what's in front of you. And then when children are frustrated, older ones, I'm thinking at this point, it might be because we assume they can attend to what's on the page and we don't know it's like a phonics lesson still. We got to go letter by letter for just a few minutes. They're older to kind of guide them towards being able to see what's on the page.
Well,
I think that's so true.
Sorry. Okay.
I was just going to say, I think that's so true because we see often our older students have directions like study this or study that, and they haven't learned to attend. And so the practice with that is what the whole point of this page is, can help them then to study the periodic table or study their essentials chart or anything else that they need to look, or a map, anything they have to look closely at.
I do think we are reclaiming just the ability to notice things, because everything about our culture today, especially for the young people, is super fast and they're on to the next thing, whether it's a digital thing in front of them or whether it's their curriculum that they're trying to complete. They're always on the move, and we're asking them to not be on the move here. We're asking them to just attend, just notice. It's a lost skill.
So as a reminder, every day we're going to look at drilling those flashcards and we're going to work some lesson pages, right? So this is your extra. This isn't supposed to be a huge piece of your time, but if you spend a few minutes drilling your flashcards and then just a few minutes practicing one of the common topics, that's all you need to do. You might want to make a note at the top of your page, right? So if I was right, I might make a note here at the top of the page where, okay, this year we practiced comparison. And then maybe I hang on to that. And so next year, when I come to this same unit with my students, I go, oh, wait, we did comparison for this last year. This year, let's try talking about this page with definition or circumstance or relationship or authority. And I'm just going to click back a couple of slides because we've talked about using the math map itself as a way to keep track. Maybe you just pull out one of the math maps, and on the math map, you could say, hey, this week we did comparison. And then you might notice if after a couple of weeks, I keep going back and forth between definition and comparison, I might say, oh, wait, we haven't done circumstance. And so maybe I work circumstance into one of those. So there's another way. You've got a math map every single week. You can pull those math maps out and help them use them to help you keep track of which common topics did we practice or which core habit did we practice. So that's another way that you could keep track. either from week to week or year to year, how you've used this page. So here is page 2. Again, normally you would probably have done this on day 1, or you may be doing it on day 2 along with the 2 set. And so, but we just want to give you the opportunity to see this page and talk about the ideas on here if you have any questions. How might this page, if I had a student working in these 3 domains, how might they work together to help one another to understand ideas that are on this page? What are some similarities between these pages that would be helpful?
Well, I
the
was
different
just
measure-
looking. Oh, go ahead, Jana.
You go ahead.
I would say I was just looking at the integrals and just naturally comparing, across the 3 domains. And I thought, oh, well, an integral in these charts is equal to 1 inch. So you could use the topic of comparison as you're looking at the integrals and find, some similarities, differences.
That's great.
And I was going to say the measurements at the bottom, like the one who's doing the monomials, if they're still kind of maybe having trouble visualizing centimeters, millimeters, whatever, it might help. They could just look, over their side at their little siblings page, and oh, okay, yeah, it. Just kind of once again helps us to get those concepts more real in our brains, the pictures.
What is something that is on all 3 pages and has a specific meaning for the math map?
The green boxes.
The green boxes.
Unity.
Yeah. Right. So we came up with this idea of what could we use that, right? What generated that idea was drawing a 1 around a fraction that was equal to 1. And we were looking for something that didn't take up quite so much room, something that was easier to do with our software. And we came up with the idea of the green box so that we could quickly show students these fractions equal 1. So here, as we look across the domains, it's a great opportunity for our older students and our younger students to easily see, oh, this is just 1, this is just 1, even though what they're comparing may seem to be a lot more complex or more difficult, that we always see this idea of it equaling 1. Any other questions from page 2? So on day 3, we would again consider using our flashcards, but we could also use some of the quick flip arithmetic games. Those are games that you can take and get a general idea from the quick flip arithmetic book, and you can easily tailor those to your specific students' computational needs. So by flipping 2 cards, you could make a fraction. You could set up where your first card is an x squared term and your second card is an x term. So notice there's a lot of different ways that we can use those cards, from all the way working with our digits up to our binomial students, that we can, or beyond, we can use those quick flip games to come up with a lot of practice, right? An almost infinite number of practice problems that we could create. Looking then at our I-cubed Memoria and arrangement page, where we are practicing our core habits of Memoria. So this week, last week we talked about naming things. This week, we're going to talk about attending. So things that I thought maybe you could attend to on this page include the zeros for each prefix. Right. And turn my highlighter back on. Right. So here's our prefixes. So I could attend by counting the zeros for each of these prefixes. If I wanted to add comparison, I could count and then compare to the index on my 10. I could practice attending by reading the significant digits rules very carefully. Because sometimes when we see those rules, it's easy to read them quickly, so we don't fully understand them. So encouraging, as Shauna said, encouraging our students to slow down and attend carefully to what those rules say. Read it, tell it back to me. What does it mean? Right? That's taking that just reading and really making it an attending, because we're going to ensure that our students are able to understand what they're reading. To practice arrangement and attending, we could ask them to highlight the box around each idea. So what do you think are some of the ideas on this page? What would you highlight?
I think I would highlight some of the, like, the subheadings.
Okay.
So that, yes, so that it would, things that would stand out. And so while that is one, then we, even within that one, there is the standard to standard and standard to scientific to like, just to point out the different sections, because again, they can look at it and go, oh, that's too much math, or, oh, I don't know how to solve anything. And again, we're not asking to solve anything. We're asking to attend. I think this is a page. These are the pages that the parents hyperventilate. A lot of times we hyperventilate. I need a brown bag, quick. But look at how many different sections you just, and that's just the top part, right? There's a lot of information on the page.
Go ahead.
No, my eye went to the bottom section with the significant digits for operations, and just talking about, there's not that many operations. It's just addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, exponents, and roots and logs. But that section there, just even that one little part right at the bottom, they're familiar with that. They should be, depending on how, if they're I'm thinking about, even upper high school, that they could easily say the operations because they've been using them for so long.
I love this. We're in chemistry. My daughter is, learning this week. And so this is just a really concise, I love it. I'm gonna make a copy out of her math map and have her just slip that in her chemistry book maybe, or something, because it's just everything in one place. It's like a chart A for significant digits.
So that is a great example of how Lee has created these pages, because we talk about significant digits in week 3, and then we look at how do you add with them in lesson 4 and subtract, and then we multiply in lesson 5 and divide in lesson 6 and consider it for exponents, roots, and logs in lesson 7. So this information has been put where it belonged with each operation, but Lee wanted it to be all together in one place. And so that's a great example of how she's created these iPages to bring sort of information that may be in different places in the charts together to help you see how it fits together. As far as highlighting our the boxes the way that I just did, right? Does that help to reduce some of that visual overload? Because now I'm just looking at 3 big boxes instead of it all being, right? So that's a way that we can help our students to attend, right? Is to say, okay, well, look, what are the big ideas on this page? Well, there's scientific notation, the prefixes, and significant digits. Well, now let's just look at one of those. And that's a way that if a student is looking at something and is really overwhelmed, kind of creating their own chunks of information may help them to reduce a little bit that anxiety. So that's our practicing attending. And then once we practiced attending, we would look at our lesson pages. And just a reminder that there's not a disconnect between practicing our core habits, our common topics, and our canons of rhetoric, that we're practicing them there in order to bring them into the lesson. Right? That when our students go, I don't know what to do, right? Well, we just talked about, okay, why don't you highlight big ideas, right? Use a highlighter to make some chunks. So if a student is really overwhelmed, right? Maybe you say, okay, my monomial student, highlight one of these sections where you think the ideas all go together. And they might say, okay, well, look, this is all about fractions. And then you might say, okay, well, highlight that. Now go work on that. Ignore the rest of the page, right? Work on this. So I'm using that skill of attending to break down this page. If I wanted to use my skill of comparison, I might say, well, is there any comparison between my inch and my little discs, my pies, right? And they may say no, because these are all 6, right? And the top are not 6. But we can still say, okay, well, what could we do? How would we break our pies up if we wanted to understand our pies, right, in terms of halves instead of 6, right? So I could take, for an older student especially, right, I could say, use this visual for 6 and do it now for 8s, right? And now I can practice halves, fourths, and 8s, right, with a pie. And if they're struggling to see it on the inch, having them draw their own pies might help them to visualize those fractions. So there's a way I can use comparison, right? What is it that I'm being asked to do in order to come up with a way to approach the top? We can certainly compare left to right. Right? So if I have a student who's struggling to fill in those 8s in the monomials lesson, maybe they go back and they look at what their brothers or sisters are doing in integers or fractions, and work through there. They can always go and compare to the chart. Right? So we're practicing those skills of learning in order to bring them here into the lesson pages to help our students to approach the lesson pages themselves. Are there questions about these lesson pages, about the math that's on these lesson pages?
I don't have a question, but like if they were completing just that one section that's highlighted in yellow on the monomials, then maybe you could go back to your fractions cards if you had them and say, okay, hunt through your deck and find the card that matches, whatever the 1/3 or the 1/2 or those kinds of things. So you could just bring back the cards in instead of, and letting them just find it. That's it.
That's a great reminder, Kristen. Thanks. I like that. If you have sons, daughters that are interested in any kind of building or woodworking, these are some really great equivalences to remember. They're very common, right? Lots of things, or sewing even, lots of things happen in 8s. And so knowing those decimal equivalents. So that's maybe something that would give them an opportunity to practice these equivalences in the context of a hobby that they may be working on. All right. Looking now at day 4, where our extra piece for day 4 is to bring in games from the back cover and to use the careful calculations. So one thought that I had as far as what's a strategy for the careful calculations is to encourage self-assessment. And that means to let your students check their own work, and then they have to come and explain the correction to you. So that the assessment is them assessing themselves, what did I get right? Then they have to figure out why it was wrong, and then they have to be able to verbalize and communicate to you why it was wrong and how they know the right answer now. That may be challenging for our younger students, but for our older students especially, and letting them model that for their younger siblings is a great way to teach them to self-assess. Not just is it right or wrong. Right? So that's our traditional education has a tendency to say, yes, I got it right or wrong. How many of you perhaps remember sitting in class where you had to either swap papers to grade papers, or some teachers would let you grade your own papers? The goal was just on what did you get right or wrong. It wasn't on understanding why. So when we ask our students to check their work, we don't just want them to do what's right and wrong. We really want them to understand why it's wrong. And that's where that learning is going to take place. You could even do that with younger students if you are willing to guide them through that. Well, what do you think is wrong? Why do you think it should have been this? Right? If we had done this, what would have happened? So you can help build your younger students up to being able to do that, or you can have your older students model that for them. It's modeling humility as well as how to figure out from a correction what the right process would have been. And then work on your lesson pages for part of day 4.
Can I ask a quick math question before you move off this page?
Absolutely. I love math questions.
Well, it's really silly, but so right in there in the middle, that 6i and the 6, can you compare can you put a greater than or less, a greater than, less than symbol in there? No, okay. I was like, I'm not sure what that answer is.
No, so the only thing, so if you come up and look at your options.
I saw that, the not equal to, is that what you would put?
Not equal to.
Okay, because I saw that beside in the next column, but I was like, I don't know where 6i doesn't fall on the real number line. So that's why you can't compare them.
If I wanted to compare them, what could I compare? How could I compare 6i and 6? What would I have to do differently to what's written here?
You would need to add the imaginary part to the real number and the real part to the imaginary number? No?
Okay, that's a
Like
step in the right
6i
direction.
plus 0 and 0i plus 6.
Let me.
So do the magnitude of them?
Yes. So if I was to look here, and I've got 6 and I have 6i, it doesn't really make sense to talk about greater than or less than because they're on 2 different axes. But if I was to ask about the magnitude of each of those, now I'm saying how far away is it from 0? That's meaningful. So how many units is 6 away from 0? Or sorry, 6i away from 0? And how many units? 6. Yep.
So then they're equal.
So their magnitudes are equal. So the numbers themselves, we can't compare, but their magnitudes we can. Jana, you look like you're still thinking through this.
I think she's having sound issues, it
Okay.
looks like. Sorry.
I wanted to make sure that what I said made sense to her. So, all right. Anybody have any other questions? All right. Looking now at page 4, again, at home, you may have done this on day 1, but for the book club, we're just going to look at pages 1 through 4 over the course of our 4 days. Are there any questions that pop up from this page? Anywhere that you see, oh, this would be a great place to use definition or attending or naming or expressing? How could you express what's on 2 of these 3 pages that you could express with something else? Thinking of expressing as being that sort of kinetic, hands-on
I was
movement.
thinking Legos. This always reminds me of Legos. And so even in monomials, the monomials student, I think it would help them to pull out their Legos and explain to me what you are seeing at the youngers, but they could do that with their problems there.
Well, that's a great idea, Shauna. So if you have
The
a
thing
base
is, it's just not, it's also an opportunity just to talk about what are the limits in your life. Like, can your older brother climb higher than your younger brother just because of the length of their bodies? You know, and who's approaching mom's height sooner?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
Lee,
Whenever
we
I
had
found anything in math that I could talk about with the student, actually dialogue about it, and then I knew their understanding, they wouldn't have to put it on the paper, with a left-handed boy or the youngest being boy. That was a treat. If they could dialogue with me and explain it to me, then they wouldn't have to write it down.
So Lee used that example of climbing trees. We had some homeschooling friends who had a daughter who was a tree climber. And at home, they let her just climb trees because that's what we do as homeschool parents. And they came over and were playing at our house one day. And lo and behold, she went up one of our trees. And I'm not just talking about a little way, like way up in the tree. And when you're not prepared for that, we were like, oh, wait, what's going on? Because our children were not particularly high tree climbers. And so I would have to be very carefully about encouraging some students to see who could climb higher up a tree. We are working on a manipulatives kit. Some of you may have base 10 blocks, or you could just use Legos, as Shauna mentioned. That's a great example, right? To actually express place value. So that's funny, Jana. I don't know if you can still hear, but I did ask. But Kristen had your back and let us know that you understood, but just didn't have sound. So there's a way that we can bring expressing in. So I just want to continually encourage us all not to get so into the weeds of the math concepts that we forget everything that we've learned about using our classical skills of learning. And when we look at these pages and they feel overwhelming or we're not sure what the next step is, to stop ourselves and say, okay, what could we attend to? What can we name? Is there a way we could express? Right? How can we bring those skills in here to help us work through these lesson pages? Right. And so if we as parents are modeling that for our students, the goal is eventually that the students are going to do that for themselves. Right. So imagine if you get used to using Legos or tissue boxes or whatever it is to model place value. And one day they just do that for themselves when they're trying to understand a number. So I did send Babs. It was really in last week's lesson where we talked about a Google and how big a Google is. But there is a video that I found of somebody who made a Lego gear reduction from Google to 1. So that was their ratio, was 1 Google to 1. And this very complex reduction process through Lego gears. So watch social media, and that I think will perhaps help you to appreciate just how big a Google is. So that's a way that somebody maybe has expressed, right, what a Google is by looking at that gear ratio, and it gives you a whole new understanding. So I think we've got some great opportunities there for both our younger students and our older students when it comes to expressing, acting out, moving, building, to get their whole selves involved and build a different kind of understanding. And that brings us to our reminder of all the support. So I just really continue to encourage, if you are new to the book club, I want you to know that the support is here for you. Everybody can email the mathmap@classicalconversations.com. There is no restriction on that. And just like God says in James, that if any of you lacks wisdom, ask of me and I will give it to you generously without criticizing. We are here to give you help generously, and we don't criticize. We don't judge. You can ask your question that you think is a stupid question, because I guarantee you, you're probably not the only person, and we are happy to help you work through it. Sometimes you think the problem is with you and it's a typo, and we can let you know that that's the case. So everybody is welcome to email the mathmap@classicalconversations.com. Shauna and Babs are there, and they work really diligently to get those questions and comments addressed the same day. Mostly, if you send something in at 5, it'll be the next day. But even then, I know that they both are just so committed to supporting families. So if you have a question, you can email. Everybody is welcome to come join the book club. If you have a friend that says, oh, I don't know, they're all smart people on the book club. They are smart because they're here, right? They're showing that they are smart enough to show up to the book club. We have some moms on here who have been doing this with us for several years, and they ask the questions that demonstrate that. But we also have moms that are on here for the first time, and everybody is welcome. There's no prerequisite, there's no math knowledge test. Everybody is welcome to join us live on the book club. So I just really always want to encourage you that you are welcome here, your friends are welcome here. Come join us live every week, or of course you can watch the recordings and access that archive. If you are looking for something specific from the book club, guess what? Email the mathmap@classicalconversations.com, and Babs and Shauna will be happy to direct you to the best episodes of the book club. We have the forums, we have the companion, and then the beauty of what we have done with the math map and the commonality between the domains is that you can work with your other parents, your fellow parents in community. You can work with those tutors because you're all on the same page. So you can go and have math conversations every week with those that you're in community with. Does anybody have any questions about the offerings of support, or how you get support, or how you find anything? And as always, that brings us to our question and answer time. And you are welcome to ask any questions that you would like to ask.
I have a question. I've noticed, and I don't know how I didn't notice this last year. So for our challenge A and B students, our guide tells us to remove and review our solutions and charts. And I remember last year having such an emphasis on don't remove them because you want to have everything together with you in your booklet. So I know it's up to the discretion of each family to choose how they want to do that, but I just wondered, kind of what the reasoning behind that was, having it in the guide as an instruction for our students.
I think it's in the guide to remind them that it can be. So I actually had a young man that I met last week, a student, a challenge. I think he's going into challenge B, and he said, "Why are the charts and the solutions in the middle of the booklet the way they are?" And I said, "Well, because they're in the middle, so you can carefully remove them from the booklet. Some parents like to have those solutions kept separately from the booklet. Some parents like to let their students use them, but in either case, it's nice to be able to lay that solution alongside the problems that you're working on. So by removing them, you can actually do that. And then the
Got it.
same with the charts. By removing those charts, they become a resource that I can use. What we would recommend is that you do that as you get to that lesson. So when I come to community and I bring booklet 3 with me, everything is there all together and I'm not going to lose it. When I get home, what I may do then is pull out my solutions, and whether I as the parent keep them or I let the student have access to them, and then my charts. And each week I might add those charts to a binder so that I'm building a reference. But I would wait. So what perhaps you heard last year is there were several parents, and I'm just going to say this, that there were several parents who had never used the curriculum before that thought they would send out great videos about cutting the books to pieces and reorganizing them and doing all kinds of crazy things. And we heard from a lot of parents who were spending hours upon hours in August trying to redesign the curriculum according to these YouTube moms who had never used the curriculum. So we would not recommend that you try and do this all at once, but that you keep your booklet together till you get to it, and then to make it easier to use, you can pull those solutions and charts out then. And so that's what that is, that instruction is referencing. So
Okay, that's great. And I love that idea of keeping it together until after your community day, and then you can take it apart. That's great. Thank you for clarifying that.
well, you're welcome.
I have a couple of questions as we're working through books.
Well, certainly, if you have a question, raise your hand or jump in and ask. But we want to thank everybody for being here this week. If you are watching the recording, thank you for watching the recording.
Kirsty, I think Andy had a question. Andy Jordan had a question. Your volume is a little low though, so.
Okay, is that any better?
Yes.
Okay, so we were looking at week 1 at home, and I had a few questions. Actually, first one, I guess, is the note cards or the flashcards we've been working on. How would you things not, it's log 4-8. How would you say that?
I would say log base 4 of 8.
Okay. I was trying to figure out how to say that to question my kids so we can work on these flashcards. I'm like, I don't know how to even say that. So, but what's fun is that we couldn't figure out how 3/2 was the answer, but we knew by doing national number knockout in essentials, we knew the half powers. And so we figured out, oh, 4 to the 3/2 power is 8. So I guess that's what that's saying.
That's what that's saying. Yep.
That's awesome. Woo! Yay for essentials. Looking at page I3 from book 1, it says, and it's just comparing the different dimensions. Is there actually a -1 dimension? Or is
There-
that just
Not that I'm aware of, but
okay?
when Lee created that table, she was kind of like, okay, well, what would have come before, right? If our pattern continues this way, could the pattern continue the other way? And
Yeah.
so that column is kind of a like, what if sort of a column. Yes.
Awesome. We were talking about black holes, like maybe that's representing black holes.
Dividing by 0.
Yeah, dividing by 0. It was a great conversation. So love that. And then also like looking at the I2 page from the first book, is there a difference between complex number and imaginary number?
Yes and no. So I'm just going to do this. So all of the numbers that we're going to talk about are going to be complex numbers, and they're going to have a real part and they're going to have an imaginary part. And so some numbers may be strictly complex, like 4 minus 3i is just a complex number. Then we have our real numbers and we have our imaginary numbers. So 4 is a real number, negative 3i is an imaginary number. Together, they're complex numbers, right? And because they're subsets, they are also, right? So all reals are complex and all imaginary are complex, but there are complex numbers that are neither real nor imaginary. Does that help? Okay.
This is a very basic question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. My kids are quite young and are going to be doing a lot of tracing. Do you think it's most helpful to have them trace in pencil or pen or highlighter? I was just trying to think of them being able to see what they've actually done. Any thoughts on that? I feel like it sounds like a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway in case there are any tips.
I don't think it's a silly question. I would say, and other people may chime in and have another opinion, but I would choose something that is comfortable in their hands so that they have the most success in being right attentive tracers. So if they're struggling, some kids kind of struggle with a narrow pencil. If they're struggling with that pencil just to control it in their hands, but they do better with a thicker highlighter or a crayon, maybe the crayon gives them a more, there's a little bit more scratchiness, friction on the page, so they may respond well to that. So you're going to get a lot of different feedback from different types of writing utensils. And so I would just encourage you to see which one is going to help your students the most. And it may be that you use a combination of them, that if you want to give them some practice where they're with a pencil and their practice is on holding the pencil in their hand, maybe find some of the shapes that don't need quite as much attention to trace. Maybe if you're trying to trace something that's a little bit more intricate, maybe you give them the fatter thing so that their focus can be on the tracing and not the holding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that
Yes,
too,
thank you.
Kirsty. And I would also say sometimes depending on the age of the student and where their fine motor skills, where their penmanship is, just even your finger, right? Then that gives it multiple usages and it gives them the idea of the shape without the concern of the exactness, particularly those ones that are perfectionists. Using their finger may give them the freedom to copy or trace it that the pencil may be intimidating.
That's a great reminder, Shauna.
Thank you.
Yeah, and no, there are no like trivial questions, right? These are all good questions because that's a great, I think that's a great thing to remember, that different tools are going to give us a different experience. And so being able to assess the pros and cons of each one. So yeah, please continue to bring your questions. That was great.
Kirsty, if I can add on to that too with the tracing, it helped me when we got into 2D. Anytime they traced anything on a rectangular coordinate or a basic graph, to first highlight the axes with a highlighter. because sometimes those were faint, and also just noticing where they were. And then you could trace in another color, like you said, maybe a combination of things. But I even had older students, even and me, because I was the kind of person who missed things from looking too quickly and not spending time checking. So doing that tracing first on the thing you don't want to miss, so that anyway, that's just another piece to add to that.
No, that's good advice. And there's also that idea of being able to do something multiple times. You could also use a page protector or an overlay and use a dry erase or a wet erase marker. So that's another way that, especially if you have a perfectionist that feels like they need to do it, oh, it wasn't right, I'm going to erase it and do it again. That gives them, with a perfectionist, sometimes we want to give them the opportunity to work towards that without letting them go too far down there. So if you do have that perfectionist who does want to erase and redo, that may be an option, but you may want to put limits on it. They can only erase it 3 times or something like that, to help them from getting bogged down on perfection on one activity, that you only get to try this 3 times and then you move on. So there's some different strategies. And Jill, for those older students, if we're tracing especially straight lines, practicing holding a ruler and tracing along the edge of the ruler is a great way to step that tracing up and add a new skill into that.
That is so true, because if you save practicing with a straight edge until that's the geometry or the constructions that you're doing, then you're learning 2 things at once, and it can be frustrating. So time to practice with that is good.
All right. Any other questions? Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate that you come and participate. And I hope that we will see you next week when we look at addition and subtraction in lesson 4.
Thank you.